Okay, that last program was really long. So here we've got more to cover. We're going to finish the central nervous system and cover the peripheral nervous system, but it won't take us as long. We'll talk about the spinal cord, its functions, and its anatomy, and then we'll talk about the peripheral nervous system, which contains both spinal and cranial nerves. We'll talk about a little bit about nerve structure and then the types of nerves that are found in spinal and cranial nerves. Okay, so the spinal cord. Here we see a posterior view of the spinal cord, and then we see a cross section. The spinal cord continues inferiorly from the medulla oblongata. So it leaves the medulla and then it leaves the cranium and it's going down in the vertebral foramen of each vertebrae, and between each vertebrae it'll give off a pair of spinal nerves. The cord has a swelling in the cervical region and a little bit in the lumbar region. Its end is called the conus medullaris, which is happening in lumbar vertebrae, and then nerves are going to migrate down that vertebral foramen and leave through lower intervertebral foramen. That bundle of nerves below the conus medullaris is the cauda equina, and the filum terminale is a connective tissue that's going to hold the spinal cord into that vertebral foramen. In the cross section here, there's lots of white matter in the outer portions of the spinal cord. These are the white columns. They carry ascending and descending fibers, or sensory ascending, motor descending. And then in the central area, there's gray matter, where you have unmyelinated nerve cell bodies and you have synapses happening right there. Okay, the spinal cord functions, the gray matter in the center part functions as an area where there can be some synapses and there can be reflexes that are centered there. And so it's an important reflex center. And then the nerve tracts, that white matter, are sensory and motor nerves that are being carried up to the brain for sensory and down to muscles or glands for motor. And these are well mapped. We know these ascending tracts, they occur primarily in the dorsal region, posterior region, and lateral regions. And then the descending tracts are primarily in the ventral regions with a little bit in some lateral regions as well. But they're well mapped out for spinal cord injuries. If we know where the injury is, we can know what we're going to expect as far as loss of function. I want to say a little bit more about reflexes. Reflexes are stereotyped, unconscious, involuntary responses to stimuli. They allow us to respond quickly to a stimuli in the same way every time. It's kind of like McDonald's. If you go to McDonald's, no matter what part of the country, you're pretty sure what kind of food you're going to get. And reflexes are like that. If a certain type of input happens, you know what's going to respond, the motor response that's coming. And so there are somatic reflexes that remove the body from danger, prevent us from falling, cause of movements because of external forces. Then we also have autonomic reflexes. These are involuntary things controlling important variables like blood pressure, blood carbon dioxide, and water intake. So a good example of a reflex is the Golgi tendon or patellar reflex. And this happens when a muscle is stretched. And so in this case, if your doctor strikes your tendon right here with a reflex hammer, that will stretch a tendon organ inside the muscle. That will send a sensory impulse back to the spinal cord. There'll be a synapse here, or possibly two, and that synapse then will go to a muscle and what happened there? Then go to a muscle and cause the muscle to contract. And so you'll get this you'll get this knee-jerk response. Okay, so that's the spinal cord. It's I would expect you to know kind of there's a swelling in the cervical and the lateral region, that there are these white columns, that there is the gray matter, the gray horns where we have the reflexes. And then the peripheral nervous system contains nerves. These are bundles of axons, mostly axons, sometimes dendrites, that are surrounded by a connective tissue, the epineurium, and then they're bundled together. Nerves that are going to this, axons that are going to the same place will be bundled together by a perineurium, and then individual cells will be surrounded by an endoneurium. And so will be blood vessels in this, but nerves are going to arise usually from the central nervous system and carry information to and from peripheral parts of the body, muscles, glands, sensory organs, things like that. Okay. One big group of nerves are the cranial nerves. These arise from the ventral surface of the brain. Usually, some of them come from the cerebrum, but most are going to be from the midbrain, the pons, and particularly the medulla oblongata. And they go to very specific regions, and they can be sensory, motor, or mixed nerves. And they're kind of named for what they're doing or where they're going. And so there's 12 pair of these: the olfactory, optic, ocular motor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducent, facial, vestibular, cochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. And so there's all sorts of mnemonic devices that are used to remember these things. And so I have given to you one here. On occasion, our trusty truck acts funny, very good vehicle. Anyhow, I grew up learning another one, and there's many, many more. But these nerves are important because they arise directly from the brain, and they're usually controlling really important functions. The olfactory nerve is the most anterior one. It comes from the cerebrum, and it's going to the nasal epithelium inside our nose for our sense of smell. The optic nerve is the second nerve. It arises from the diencephalon, kind of just below the cerebrum, and there's a big crossover, and that's going to go to the retina of the eye. Then from posteriorly from the midbrain, you have the trochlear and abducens. These go to the ocular motor and the trochlear. These are going to the muscles of the eye, and they're motor nerves that are controlling eye muscles, like that make the eyes move back and forth, that change the shape of the lens, or that control the amount of light entering the eye. The trigeminal is a mixed nerve that's going to various parts of the face. The abducens is going again to eye muscles. Then you have the facial, mixed nerve going to various parts of the face. Vestibular cochlear is going to our inner ear and is involved in hearing and in our sense of balance. And then the glossopharyngeal, glosso refers to the tongue, and pharynx is going to the pharynx, responsible for our sense of taste. Hypoglossal, that means below the tongue, is another nerve. Let's see on the other side. Then you have the vagus and accessories. The vagus is a really important one to know because the vagus controls many internal organs. Okay, so these spinal nerves are another set of nerves that arise, and they come from the spinal cord, and they're exiting the spinal cord by way of the intervertebral foramen, which is between two vertebrae. And so there are 8 cervical, 12 lumbar, or 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and a coccygeal nerve. These nerves are all mixed. They contain both motor and sensory portions. They each have 2 nerve roots, and the nerve roots are, one is sensory and one is motor. I'll show you those in a minute. And they're going to go to, they have somatic and autonomic portions, and so they're going to go to the skin and muscles, and then they're also going to go to internal organs. And so they do that there. That little picture of the guy there, front and back, those are the regions of the body controlled by the various spinal nerves. And so these are skin regions that are controlled by each nerve. And so that sensory input from those regions of the skin goes back to the brain by way of a particular spinal nerve. And so the areas in blue are cervical spinal nerves. The areas in green are thoracic spinal nerves. Then you have lumbar spinal nerves, and then sacral spinal nerves in purple and pink, respectively. So each spinal nerve arises from the spinal cord. The dorsal root of the spinal nerve is a sensory root, and it will contain a swelling called a ganglia. And this is a collection of nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system. And then there's also a ventral root, and the ventral root is entirely motor, but it will contain both autonomic and somatic portions. And then those are all going to enter or exit the spinal cord via the spinal nerve. And so these nerve roots are sensory and motor, and then the nerve itself is mixed. Okay, and so here we have the innervation and the for each of the spinal nerves, and so it shows you what structures are going to be innervated by each nerve. I'm not so interested that you memorize this, but that you know that it's known, okay, and that you know that we can figure that out. And again, if there's damage to a spinal nerve, it can be very specific, and you can localize that damage based upon where there's loss of function or loss of feeling. Okay, so in summary, the spinal cord functions as a reflex center and to carry sensory and motor informations. Nerves are bundles of axons and dendrites in the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nerves arise from either the spinal cord or from the brain, and nerves may be sensory, motor, or mixed. Reflexes are stereotyped responses to stimuli. And here's a picture of the branch of the trigeminal nerve. I think this is a facial nerve, and it's going to go to the tongue and to parts of the skin on the nose and in the face. Okay. All right.